Divided Congress as he hits the halfway point in his presidency. For the first time in 4 years, Nancy Pelosi will not be sitting behind the president. This time you will see Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. We expect President Biden to highlight his achievements and roll out his vision for the next 2 years, and to ask Republicans to work with him as he renews calls to unite the country. This as he faces crises at home and abroad, including a rising threat from China. Fallout continues after a Chinese surveillance balloon lingered across the country last week. The president also grappling with a surge of migrants pouring over the southern border. And once-in-a-generation inflation has many Americans, millions in fact, living paycheck to paycheck. We hope to hear tonight how he will address all of that. He will most likely steer clear of his handling of classified documents that is now under special counsel investigation. But House Republicans plan to put that in focus, launching hearings in just hours, 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow here in Washington. A quick turnaround for lawmakers putting in a late night. For their part, Republicans have chosen the newly elected governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, to deliver the GOP response. She will offer a stark contrast to Biden's address, and not just in policy. America's youngest sitting governor will respond to the nation's oldest president, taking aim at the president's economic failures and what she calls a left-wing culture war. All of this as the country waits to hear if a Biden 2024 presidential run is in the cards. We have got coverage tonight from all across Capitol Hill. Let's bring in Fox News congressional correspondent Chad Pergram live on the Hill. You've covered many a State of the Union address tonight. Chad, what are your thoughts going into this?
Well, Shannon, this is the first normal State of the Union since 2019, full seating in the House chamber, plus guests. The pandemic altered two addresses. Former President Trump gave his last State of the Union during the 2020 impeachment trial. The speech wasn't officially called State of the Union until 1947. The term State of the Union is derived from the Constitution. It says the president shall, from time to time, give Congress information on the State of the Union. Shannon?
All right, Ted, we are waiting the president's arrival into the chamber. It's always interesting to watch as he makes his way down the aisle. There tend to be well-wishers from both sides of the aisle, literally and figuratively, Democrats and Republicans alike, welcoming into the chamber. We've got a couple here with us tonight. Let's bring in our panel. Jason Chaffetz, former Republican congressman from Utah and a Fox News contributor, and John Delaney, a former Democratic congressman from Maryland. He also knows what it's like to run for the presidency. Gentlemen, welcome. We may take a break once the president enters, but you all have been there and been seated there as members. Jason, what is it like this moment awaiting the president, whether it's Democrat or Republican, to share their philosophy?
It's historic. I mean, no matter the president, I think it's your duty to be there, and you hear people from both sides of the aisle, and you come and you listen to the president. I was there for all of the Barack Obama.
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, yes. Let's listen in.
States.
We bring John in here. It tends to be very cordial. People crowd along the aisles. They want to get in there. It tends to be nonpartisan until the speech starts. Then it often takes a different turn. But for now, the welcome in is an uproarious, kind one from all sides.
Well, it's a wonderful tradition. I think the Capitol is the most beautiful building in the world. This is a patriotic moment. The whole government is in session listening to the president. He's everyone's president. And it's a very exciting evening. It'll be interesting to see. I think the president has a lot of good stuff to talk about tonight.
Well, yeah, and Jason, you were finishing your thought about going during the President Obama years. Important for both sides to be there and be supportive of the president.
Yeah, like John said, it's a patriotic moment. It is something that unites the country. He is the president of the United States. I think you stand, you respect the presidency, you clap. And you join together. And when they recognize people like the military or ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things, that should bring us together. But oftentimes, the applause, you'll see one half of the room stand and the other half of the room not stand. And that, too, is the American way.
And this president is coming into this State of the Union speech tonight with a lot of bad polling. It's tough for him, whether it's on the economy or the border, security, immigration, all of these things. He's got headwinds there because there are all of our Fox polls and its other networks and other outlets, too, show that he's got an uphill battle. And, John, a lot of it is coming from within his own party. A majority of Democrats say they don't want him to run again in 24.
Listen, the polling was bad before the midterms for Democrats, and it turned out to be a very successful midterm election. So I don't read too much into the polls. I mean, the country's been through a lot. We're still dealing with the residual effects of COVID, and we're very kind of partisan right now, and we're very divided, and I think that's reflected in the polls. The good news is the president's had a terrific run economically. 12 million jobs created, lowest unemployment in 50 years. Inflation is moderating. Listen, inflation was a problem, and it really did affect the American people. That's in these poll numbers. But the good news is we're seeing moderating inflation while unemployment remains low, and that's really hard to do, Shannon. He's got all his legislative accomplishments to talk about. He ran as a bipartisan leader. He delivered huge bipartisan accomplishments on infrastructure, on veterans health care, on reshoring the chips industry. So he's got a lot to talk about.
And he will talk about those, of course, trying to make his case tonight to the American people that they have accomplished things. But, Jason, why are the polls so out of step with these accomplishments, with where the economy is? And listen, it was 1.4% inflation when he took office. It's sitting in December at 6.5, so moving in the right direction, but still very painful for most people going to get groceries and fill up their car with gas.
Yeah, you'll be shocked to know that I disagree with John and his analysis here because, look, the president undoubtedly will cite a couple of numbers, but he won't talk about labor participation rate. And when you start talking about inflation, it really hits people in the pocketbook. They know, despite whatever the president may say about, oh, we brought down the deficit or we did that, they understand what their own situation's like. He also needs to talk about international issues. I think the country feels less secure there. And the homelessness, things like this that the president should address, but I don't think he'll necessarily be doubting.
A lot of tough issues for this White House. I want to get back to Chad, program on Capitol Hill. So, Chad, we understand the president, from one of the excerpts we have tonight, is going to reach out and say to Republicans, let's see where we can work together. I imagine that's going to be on the debt ceiling. That's got to be solved. I imagine it's going to be on immigration, which everybody admits across the political spectrum that it's a mess. They don't agree how to fix it. How much willingness do you think there is among Republicans to meet this president halfway on some of these issues?
Not much in the House of Representatives, but if they want to get something done, they're going to have to work together. And when you talk about the debt ceiling, this is where you could see a coalition, a small coalition of some Republicans and lots of Democrats getting together to fund the government this fall. Also, maybe lift the debt ceiling by June, maybe even work out some sort of an agreement to put some spending caps in, Shannon.
Yeah, and this White House has said they would not negotiate, although the president has had a meeting with the new House Speaker, Republican Kevin McCarthy. Both came out of that and said it was a positive discussion. You see there, they are shaking hands as the president hands off copies of his speech to the speaker, to the vice president who is standing by. And we wait now as the president is going to start amidst a lot of hurrahs and applause tonight. He is ready to address not only the folks in that room, but the American people, as he knows they are the ones who need to hear his message. Let's listen.
It's a high privilege and a distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress. By the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think you. Only this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader, and you're the majority leader. About that much bigger? Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threats in the Civil War. And today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, we're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. It came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it's important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think Folks, you all are as informed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not no one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs move overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. And along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. He really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. Near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, Inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight. They were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips, each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up. People got laid off. So did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres, literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factories. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs. Because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. And it's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses. So much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be #1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back because we came together and passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And I mean this sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. I went there last month with Democrats and Republicans, and from both states, to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. the folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America, 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which many thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again, I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it. We're going to buy American. We're going to buy America. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards that require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back. Because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you. What are you going to have? You get money to pay for those medical bills? Or are you going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it? I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, we're taking on powerful interests to bring health care costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It costs the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Packaging and all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed the law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. People are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes who need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Folks, the big pharma is still going to do very well, I promise you all. I promise you they're going to do very well. This law also caps and won't even go into effect until 2025. Costs, out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors on Medicare at a maximum of $2,000 a year. You don't have to pay more than $2,000 a year, no matter how much your drug costs are. Because you know why? You all know it. Many of you, like many in my family, have cancer. You know the drugs can range from $10,000, $11,000, $14,000, $15,000 for the cancer drugs. If drug prices rise faster than inflation, drug companies are going to have to pay Medicare back the difference. We're finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Bringing down prescription drug costs doesn't just save seniors money. It cuts the federal deficit by billions of dollars, by hundreds of billions of dollars, because these prescription drugs are drugs purchased by Medicare to keep their commitment to the seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach, that's okay, that's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year. Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of prescription drugs, I will veto it. Look, I'm pleased to say that more Americans have health insurance now than ever in history. A record 16 million people are enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And thanks to the law I signed last year, millions are saving $800 a year on their premiums. And by the way, that law was written and the benefit expires in 2025. So my plea to some of you, at least in this audience, let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. Expand coverage of Medicaid. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. Lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited the devastating aftermath of record floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires from Arizona to Mexico to all the way up to the Canadian border. More timber has been burned, that I've observed from helicopters, than the entire state of Missouri. And we don't have global warming? Not a problem. In addition to emergency recovery, from Puerto Rico to Florida to Idaho, we're rebuilding for the long term. New electric grids that are able to weather major storms and not prevent those forest fires. Roads and water systems will withstand the next big flood. Clean energy to cut pollution and create jobs in communities often left behind. We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat. We have an obligation, not to ourselves, but to our children and grandchildren, to confront it. I'm proud of how America, at last, is stepping up to the challenge. We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. And we pay for these investments in our future by finally making the wealthiest and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share. Just begin. Look, I'm a capitalist. I'm a capitalist, but pay your fair share. I think a lot of you at home agree with me and many people that you know. The tax system is not fair. It is not fair. Look, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. God love them. 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. And let me be crystal clear. I said at the very beginning, under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do. We have to reward work, not just wealth. Pass my proposal for the billionaire minimum tax. You know, there's 1,000 billionaires in America. It's up from about 600 in the beginning of the term. But no billionaire should be paying a lower tax rate than a school teacher or firefighter. I mean it. Think about it. I mean, look. I know you aren't enthusiastic about that, but think about it. Think about it. Have you noticed Big Oil just reported its profits, record profits? Last year they made $200 billion in the midst of a global energy crisis. I think it's outrageous. Why? They invested too little of that profit to increase domestic production. And when I talk to a couple of them, they say, we're afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells, all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade. And that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it. Production. If they had, in fact, invested in the production to keep gas prices down, instead, they used the record profits to buy back their own stock, rewarding their CEOs and shareholders. Corporations ought to do the right thing. That's why I propose we quadruple the tax on corporate stock buybacks and encourage long-term investments. They'll still make considerable profit. Let's finish the job and close the loopholes that allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Instead of cutting the number of audits for wealthy taxpayers, I just signed a law to reduce the deficit by $114 billion by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. That's being fiscally responsible. In the last 2 years, my administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion. the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster to the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be stopped? All right. We got unanimity. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for millions of seniors. Americans have to pay into them from the very first paycheck they started. So tonight, let's all agree, and we apparently are, let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We'll not cut Social Security. If anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But apparently it's not going to be a problem. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it. Let's sit down together and discuss our mutual plans together. Let's do that. I can tell you, the plan I'm going to show you is going to cut the deficit by another $2 trillion. And it won't cut a single bit of Medicare or Social Security. In fact, we're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about tonight, by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share. Look. Here's the deal. They aren't just taking advantage of the tax code. They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars because they can finally get a hearing aid over the counter without a prescription. Look, capitalism without competition is not capitalism. It's extortion. It's exploitation. Last year, I cracked down with the help of many of you on foreign shipping companies that were making you pay higher prices for every good coming into the country. I signed a bipartisan bill to cut shipping costs by 90%, helping American farmers, businessmen, and consumers. Let's finish the job. Pass the bipartisan legislation to strengthen antitrust enforcement and prevent big online platforms from giving their own products an unfair advantage. My administration is also taking on junk fees, those hidden surcharges too many companies use to make you pay more. For example, we're making airlines show you the full ticket price up front, refund your money if your flight is canceled or delayed. We've reduced exorbitant bank overdrafts by saving consumers more than $1 billion a year. We're cutting credit card late fees by 75%, from $30 to $8. Look, junk fees may not matter to the very wealthy, but they matter to most other folks in homes like the one I grew up in, like many of you did. They add up to hundreds of dollars a month. They make it harder for you to pay your bills or afford that family trip. I know how unfair it feels when a company overcharges you and gets away with it. Not anymore. We've written a bill to stop it all. It's called the Junk Fee Prevention Act. We're going to ban surprise resort fees that hotels charge on your bill. Those fees can cost you up to $90 a night at hotels that aren't even resorts. The idea that cable, internet, and cell phone companies can charge you $200 or more if you decide to switch to another provider. Give me a break. We can stop service fees on tickets to concerts and sporting events and make companies disclose all the fees up front. And we'll prohibit airlines from charging $50 round trip for a family just to be able to sit together. Baggage fees are bad enough. Airlines can't treat your child like a piece of baggage. Americans are tired of being. We're tired of being played for suckers. So pass the Junk Fee Prevention Act so companies stop ripping us off. For too long, workers have been getting stiffed, but not anymore. We're beginning to restore the dignity of work. For example, I should have known this, but I didn't until 2 years ago. 30 million workers have to sign non-compete agreements for the jobs they take. 30 million. So a cashier at a burger place can't walk across town and take the same job at another burger place and make a few bucks more. It just changed. But they just changed it because we exposed it. That was part of the deal, guys. Look it up. But not anymore. We're banning those agreements so companies have to compete for workers and pay them what they're worth. And I must tell you, this is bound to get a response from my friends on my left but the right. I'm so sick and tired of companies breaking the law by preventing workers from organizing. Pass the PRO Act, because business have a right, workers have a right to form a union. And let's guarantee all workers have a living wage. Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care. That's going to enable millions of more people to go and stay at work. And let's restore the full child tax credit, which gave tens of millions of parents some breathing room and cut child poverty in half to the lowest level in history. And by the way, when we do all these things, we increase productivity. We increase economic growth. So let's finish the job and get more families access to affordable, quality housing. Let's get seniors who want to stay in their homes the care they need to do so. Let's give more breathing room to millions of family caregivers looking after their loved ones. Pass my plan so we get seniors and people with disabilities the home care and services they need. And support the workers who are doing God's work. These plans are fully paid for, and we can afford to do them. Restoring the dignity of work means making education an affordable ticket to the middle class. You know, when we made public education, 12 years of it universal in the last century, we made the best educated, best paid, we became the best educated, best paid nation in the world. But the rest of the world's caught up. It's caught up. Jill, my wife, who teaches full time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Any nation that out-educates is going to out-compete us. Folks, we all know 12 years of education is not enough to win the economic competition of the 21st century. We want to have the best educated workforce. Let's finish the job by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. Studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school and go on to earn a 2- or 4-year degree, no matter their background they came from. Let's give public school teachers a raise. We're making progress by reducing student debt, increasing Pell Grants for working and middle-class families. Let's finish the job and connect students to career opportunities starting in high school. Provide access to 2 years of community college, the best career training in America, in addition to being a pathway to a 4-year degree. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And folks, in the midst of the COVID crisis, when schools were closed and we were shutting down everything, let's recognize how far we came in the fight against the pandemic itself. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of the American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we've broken the COVID grip on us. COVID deaths are down by 90%. We've saved millions of lives and opened up our country. We opened our country back up, and soon we'll end the public health emergency. But that's called a public health emergency. But we'll remember the toll and pain that's never going to go away. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID. 1 million. Families grieving, children orphaned, empty chairs at the dining room table constantly reminding you that she used to sit there. Remembering them, we remain vigilant. We still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts and keep America safe. And as we emerge from this crisis stronger, we're also got to double down on prosecuting criminals who stole relief money meant to keep workers and small businesses afloat. Before I came to office, you remember, during that campaign, the big issue was about inspector generals who would protect taxpayers' dollars who were sidelined. They were fired. Many people said we don't need them. And fraud became rampant. Last year, I told you the watchdogs are back. Since then, we've recovered billions of taxpayers' dollars. Now let's triple the anti-fraud strike force going after these criminals, double the statute of limitations on these crimes, and crack down on identity fraud by criminal syndicates stealing billions of dollars from the American people. And the data shows that for every dollar we put into fighting fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all people are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is violated. Joining us tonight are the parents of Tyree Nichols. Welcome. We had to bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children. I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them, if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. The faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this. Imagine how much courage and care that takes. It's up to us, to all of us. We all want the same thing. Neighborhoods free of violence. Law enforcement who earns the community's trust. Just as every cop, when they pin on that badge in the morning, has a right to be able to go home at night, so does everybody else out there. Our children have a right to come home safely. Equal protection under the law is a covenant we have with each other in America. We know police officers put their lives on the line every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. In one sense, we ask much too much of them. I know most cops and their families are good, decent, honorable people, the vast majority. But they risk and they risk their lives every time they put that shield on. But what happened to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. Help them succeed in keeping us safe. We also need more first responders and professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges. More resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime. More community intervention programs. More investment in housing, education, and job training. All this can help prevent violence in the first place. And when police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. With the support of the families of victims, civil rights groups, and law enforcement, I signed an executive order for all federal officers, banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants, and other key elements of the George Floyd Act. Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good. And all of us, Folks, it's difficult, but it's simple. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts that we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform. Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others. But we know our work is not done. Joining us tonight is Brandon Say, a 26-year-old hero. Brandon put his college dreams on hold to be at his mom's side. His mom's side when she was dying from cancer. And Brandon now works at the dance studio started by his grandparents. And 2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, he heard the studio door close, and he saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestled a semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all. I led the fight to do that in 1994. And in 10 years, that ban was law, mass shootings went down. After we let it expire in the Republican administration, mass shootings tripled. Let's finish the job and ban these assault weapons. And let's also come together on immigration. Make it a bipartisan issue once again. We know we now have a record number of personnel working to secure the border, arresting 8,000 human smugglers, seizing over 23,000 pounds of fentanyl in just the last several months. We've launched a new border plan last month. Unlawful migration from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela has come down 97% as a consequence of that. But American border problems won't be fixed until Congress acts. If we don't pass my comprehensive immigration reform, at least pass my plan to provide the equipment and officers to secure the border. And a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those on temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Here in the People's House, it's our duty to protect all the people's rights and freedoms. Congress must restore the right and the Congress must restore the right that was taken away in Roe v. Wade and protect Roe v. Wade. Give every woman a consular right. The Vice President and I are doing everything to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient safety. But already more than a dozen states are enforcing extreme abortion bans. Make no mistake about it. If Congress passes a national ban, I will veto it. But let's also pass the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity. Our strength is not just the example of our power, but the power of our example. Let's remember the world's watching. I spoke from this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. a murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Would we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did. And together, we did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, we're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you as long as it takes. Our nation is working for more freedom, more dignity, more peace, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made clear in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger, investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominated, investing in our alliances and working with our allies to protect advanced technologies so they will not be used against us, modernizing our military to safeguard stability and deter aggression. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world. And I'm committed. I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world. But make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracy has grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one. America's rallying the world to meet those challenges, from climate to global health, to food insecurity, to terrorism, to territorial aggression. Allies are stepping up, spending more and doing more. Look, the bridges we're forming between partners in the Pacific and those in the Atlantic, and those who bet against America are learning how wrong they are. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. Never. Well, when I came to office, most assured that bipartisanship assumed was impossible, but never believed it. That's why a year ago I offered a unity agenda to the nation as I stood here. We made real progress together. We passed a law making it easy for doctors to prescribe effective treatments for opioid addiction. We passed the gun safety law, making historic investments in mental health. We launched the ARPA-H drive for breakthrough in the fights against cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and so much more. We passed The Heath Robinson PACT Act, named after the late Iraq War veteran whose story about exposure to toxic burn kits I shared here last year. I understand something about those burn pits, but there's so much more to do. We can do it together. Joining us tonight is a father named Doug from Newton, New Hampshire. He wrote Jill, my wife, a letter, and me as well, about his courageous daughter, Courtney. A contagious laugh, his sister's best friend, her sister's best friend. He shared a story all too familiar to millions of Americans and many of you in the audience. Courtney discovered pills in high school. It spiraled into addiction and eventually death from a fentanyl overdose. She was just 20 years old. Describing the last 8 years without her, Doug said, "There's no worse pain." Yet their family has turned pain to purpose, working to end the stigma and change laws. He told us he wants to start a journey toward American recovery. Doug, we're with you. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. You got it. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border. Working with couriers like FedEx to inspect more packages for drugs. Strong penalties to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. Second, let's do more on mental health, especially for our children. When millions of young people are struggling with bullying, violence, trauma, we owe them greater access to mental health care at their schools. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online, ban targeted advertising to children, and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Third, let's do more to keep this nation's one truly sacred obligation to equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home. Job training, job placement for veterans and their spouses as they come to return to civilian life. Helping veterans afford the rent, because no one should be homeless in America, especially someone who served the country. Dennis McDonough is here of the VA. We had a first real discussion when I asked him to take the job. I'm glad he did. We were losing up to 25 veterans a day on suicide. Now we're losing 17 a day to the silent scourge of suicide. 17 veterans a day are committing suicide. More than all the people being killed in the wars. Folks, VA is doing everything it can, including expanding mental health screening, proven programs that recruits veterans to help other veterans understand what they're going through, get them the help they need. We got to do more. And fourth, last year, Jill and I reignited the cancer moonshot that I was able to start with President Obama asked me to lead our administration on this issue. Our goal is to cut the cancer death rates at least by 50% in the next 25 years. Turn more cancers from death sentences to treatable diseases. Provide more support for patients and their families. It's personal to so many of us in this audience. Joining us are Morris and Candice, an Irishman and the daughter of immigrants from Panama. They met and fell in love in New York City and got married in the same chapel Jill and I got married in New York City. Kindred spirits. He wrote us a letter about his little daughter, Ava, and I saw her just before I came over. She was just a year old when she was diagnosed with rare kidney disease, cancer. After 26 blood transfusions, 11 rounds of radiation, 8 rounds of chemo, 1 kidney removed, given a 5% survival rate. He wrote how in the darkest moments he thought, if she goes, I can't stay. Many of you have been through that as well. Jill and I understand that like so many of you. And he read Jill's book describing our family's cancer journey and how we tried to steal moments of joy where we could with Bo. For them, that glimmer of joy was the half smile of their baby girl. It meant everything to them. They never gave up hope. Little Ava never gave up hope. She turns 4 next month. They just found out Ava's beating the odds, is on her way to being cured of cancer. And she's watching from the White House tonight if she's not asleep already. For the lives we can save, for the lives we can save and the lives we've lost, let this be a truly American moment that rallies the country and the world together and proves that we can still do big things. 20 years ago, under the leadership of President Bush and countless advocates and champions, he undertook a bipartisan effort through PEPFAR to transform the global fight against HIV/AIDS. It's been a huge success. He thought big. He thought large. He moved. I believe we can do the same thing with cancer. Let's end cancer as we know it. Cure some cancers once and for all. Folks, there's one reason why we've been able to do all of these things. Our democracy itself. It's the most fundamental thing of all. With democracy, everything's possible. Without it, nothing is. For the last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie assailed and unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th. Here tonight in this chamber is a man who bears the scars of that brutal attack, but is as tough and as strong, as resilient as they get. My friend Paul Pelosi. Paul, stand up. But such a heinous act should have never happened. We must all speak out. There's no place for political violence in America. We have to protect the right to vote, not suppress the fundamental right. Honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We have to uphold the rule of law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment where they have been called to protect our democracy, defend it, stand up for it. And this is our moment. My fellow Americans, we meet tonight at an inflection point, one of those moments that only a few generations ever face, where the direction we now take is going to decide the course of this nation for decades to come. We're not bystanders of history. We're not powerless before the forces that confront us. It's within our power of we, the people. We're facing the test of our time. We have to be the nation we've always been at our best. Optimistic, hopeful, forward-looking. A nation that embraces light over dark, hope over fear, unity over division, stability over chaos. We have to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We're good people. The only nation in the world built on an idea, the only one. Other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity. But we're the only nation based on an idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God. A nation that stands as a beacon to the world. A nation in a new age of possibilities. So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. Because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong. I'm not new to this place. I stand here tonight having served as long as about any one of you have ever served here. But I've never been more optimistic about our future, about the future of America. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
President Biden having completed his State of the Union address on topics ranging from China, the threat he says we face there, the message he wants to send them, domestic issues from immigration to oil production to entitlements and everything in between. Let's bring back in our panel two former members of Congress who have been at these State of the Union speeches and have watched now, and they're with us watching tonight. We have John Delaney, Democrat, and Jason Chaffetz, Republican. Okay, so moments that stood out for you tonight. And I got to say, there were times this felt like we had gone across the pond to the UK with some audience participation and some verbal jousting with the president, John.
Listen, Shannon, I thought it was a terrific speech. It was optimistic. The president opened with the word possibilities. He closed with the word possibilities. It was patriotic. It talked about what's great about our nation. I just thought it was a terrific speech. It was forward-looking. He talked about bringing jobs back to this country, how we can successfully compete and win against China in the global economy. He sold his agenda incredibly well. If any Democrat doesn't think he is the best person to run in our party for president in 2024, they weren't watching this speech, because his accomplishments across the first 2 years, he did a great job showcasing. And then he sold it really well. I thought it was a refreshing speech, but it was also balanced. He moved from talking about his agenda to changing his tone and bringing in the personal stories, like the story of Ava and what she and her parents endured. So I thought it was balanced. I thought it was patriotic. I thought it was inspiring. I thought the president showed a lot of energy. And I think he made a case for his next 2 years to work with the Congress on a bipartisan basis, which was a huge theme across his whole speech. But also he made a case for his re-election in 2024.
Yeah, and as we talked about going into this, he has polling numbers that he's got to fight an uphill battle with Democrats, with independents, that they are not convinced that he is the one. And many of them, in majorities in those areas, are saying we would like to see somebody else on the Democrat ticket as our nominee next time around. Jason, did he move that needle at all tonight?
No, I think if he continues on that current trajectory, I think he will continue to run into problems. I think people are left this speech think, well, what is his plan to tackle inflation? To try to cite some statistics doesn't hit to the heart of what people are really concerned about. I thought the high point for him was talking about Ava. When you talk about a young child overcoming cancer, everybody can unite about this. I thought it was terribly embarrassing that the president didn't have even a complete sentence about the United States military. That is something a president, as the commander-in-chief, should have been talking about and touting and getting behind, and everybody would have erupted in applause. And for him to address fentanyl, but not address the scourge at the border, the openness of the border, how these drugs are transferred, is just a dereliction of duty. For him to suggest that the only thing that is going to fix the open borders that we have is comprehensive immigration reform. It just shows how clueless he is. And I guarantee you the 20,000+ Border Patrol agents who are watching this are going to look at this and think, this is our commander-in-chief. He doesn't understand why the border is wide open and why we have this fentanyl and where fentanyl comes from. I thought he totally, completely missed the mark on issues that really matter.
And that's going to be a tough one because he needs Congress to work together with him, with each other. We've got, divided a House controlled by Republicans. The Senate is run by the Democrats. I think they know there's going to be an extremely heavy lift in the next 2 years to get comprehensive immigration reform passed. But when he broached it and talked about trying to work together, you heard some of the Republicans repeatedly there shouting, secure the border. And, John, they say they've got to see that before they'll agree to pathway to citizenship or anything else. Are these two sides too far apart to get something done?
No, I don't think they're too far apart. I mean, we saw only a few years ago how we were so close to comprehensive immigration reform. It passed in the U.S. Senate. President Obama was ready to sign it into law. If it would have got a vote on the House floor, which it never did, Jason and I were there when this happened, it would have passed. And that framework where we invest on our border, make our border more secure, deal with the immigration needs of the country, address the dreamers, that framework for a deal, it's still there for the taking. And I thought what the president did tonight was talk about his success on a bipartisan basis, because he's had a huge amount of bipartisan success. And he was leaning into how he'll do that in the next 2 years. So I think he set the table for that discussion.
But look, he spent more time talking about this big national problem of kids signing non-disclosures or non-compete agreements that are flipping burgers than he did about how we're going to address the energy costs in this country. He didn't lay out a plan on how he's going to drive down the cost of gasoline and how he's going to deal with inflation. That's the problem. The president's talking about issues that nobody else is talking about, like the non-competes for people that flip burgers. He literally said that.
Well, and
he talked about inflation.
The junk fees thing was a little bit interesting, too. He went on to talk about how confusing it is when you buy a flight or when you go to a hotel, and had kind of a laugh line there when he said these resort fees for hotels that are not resorts. You got a lot of laughter there, but people are sort of wondering, like, what? We're covering a lot of issues. Was that a priority to talk about the junk fees tonight when we do have so many big problems like inflation?
Well, inflation, the last 6 months, it's been 3%. Right, so if we go the next 6 months at the same rate it's been the last 6 months, inflation will be down to 3%.
Okay.
So and gas prices are down. So listen,
but they've
inflation,
actually been up the last few weeks.
Yes, but they're down from their high. Listen, inflation is a huge problem, and it really hurt the American people. But the Fed, that's the responsibility of the Federal Reserve, principally, and their tools are actually starting to work. So I thought the president covered that ground. I thought the president talked about the big things he did his first 2 years. And I think what he was trying to do was talk about some specific things that really impact the American people. I mean, in a time of high inflation, you want to talk about getting rid of fees. You want to talk about doing anything to lower the life of your everyday American who's just trying to get by. And I thought that's why he was touching on those things.
So a reminder that we are awaiting the response. The GOP has selected Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the youngest governor in the nation, to talk about, and we've seen a preview of some of her remarks, and she's going to go hard after what she says is the leftist woke agenda. We'll hear that from her in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, another thing that came up tonight is the debt ceiling. All of us here in Washington are aware that we've technically hit where we have to be on triggering that. We've got extraordinary measures in place. They've got probably about 5 months before they have to get something concrete done, and we really start to get in trouble on that front. These two have had meetings, the Speaker and the President. They've both come out of that and said, we can move the ball forward. There are things we can agree on. But tonight, one of the things we heard from the president, and I saw this line coming in the speech, is he said there are Republicans who want to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They want to cut entitlements. And there were immediate boos because Republicans, including the Speaker, have repeatedly come out to say that is not on the table. We do not agree on that. He's, of course, pointing back to Senator Rick Scott, who at one point had a plan that had some discussion of that. But he really got into this strange, Jason, back and forth with members of Congress in the middle of his speech about whether or not that's on the table.
No, and the president may have been baiting them a little bit to kind of overstep the line. Republicans, their position is you have to fix these programs in order to save them. If you continue on the current trajectory, they go insolvent. So you better address it now. The sooner you address it now. But nobody's suggesting that you're cutting somebody's benefits. That's where Democrats, I think, overstepped the line and where the president said too much where you had verbal responses from Republicans saying, no, that's not true. That's not where we're going.
It was quick thinking by the president, though, because he did get the whole chamber to basically say, so we're in complete agreement. We're in unanimous agreement that there'll be no cuts to Social Security. So that kind of takes that issue off the table.
Which Republicans have been saying it's off the table,
yes.
but they sound like they're all on the same page now.
But if Democrats don't even put forward a budget, they don't even pretend to do a budget. The president's budget is actually due now. It's not going to introduce it until March. Then what and when are you actually going to talk about this massive $31 trillion debt? The interest on that debt is going to eclipse what we spend on defense. I mean, it's insurmountable. So there has to be a point in time when you actually discuss it.
And the president has said, he has said, you show me your budget, I'll show you mine. I mean, he's saying that there are places that they can talk where, they've been saying a pretty hard line to this point. There are going to be no discussions, no negotiations over the debt ceiling. And then, of course, because the president's been in Washington for so long, it's easy to go back for anybody who's been in Washington for too long to find these sound bites where when he was vice president, they were negotiating over the debt ceiling back in 2011, for one example. He said it's not governing to say that you won't come to the table and not negotiate. So I think he acknowledges.
Right.
Everybody knows they're going to have to negotiate.
And look, the Congress is guilty of not dealing with our unsustainable fiscal trajectory. I'm sure Jason and I are in complete agreement with that.
Look at that.
The Congress is guilty. No, but it's true. We are in an unsustainable fiscal trajectory. That idea can coexist at the same time as the debt ceiling should not be messed with. We can't risk putting our country in default, ruining our standing as the reserve currency, and potentially costing the American people millions of jobs. So they're separate issues.
So let's figure it out in the next 5 months. Can they do that?
The debt ceiling forces that discussion, and it forces things like, should we have a balanced budget agreement or amendment? I happen to think we do. I think we have to get there. But they should have that debate and that argument. If you don't even introduce a budget, it's hard to do it.
But look, we've had the debt ceiling for
last year.
We've had the debt ceiling for a long time, and there's been brinkmanship on the debt ceiling for a long time, and our fiscal trajectory has gotten worse. So it clearly doesn't accomplish that objective, right? The way to accomplish that objective is to get good-minded Democrats and Republicans around the table and to put revenues and spending on the table and come up with a balanced plan to change our fiscal trajectory.
We've never been taking in more revenue than we're taking in now. So we've got to have the full conversation, like you said, about
the president tonight was talking about tax increases, stock buybacks from companies, things like that. He's talking about tax increases. What he didn't talk about was tax relief for people that are starting these small businesses that he touted, to creating an easier pathway to start a business and to maintain a business and to have a business. He didn't even talk about that. And I bet Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when she moments from now speaks, she's actually going to do it.
He did talk about a record number of small businesses that have gotten created.
He did. And talk about how that's hopeful and it's the engine of America. But let me bring in, first of all, let's get back to Chad Pergram because he's there and has got a perch on all of this over on Capitol Hill. All right, Chad, you saw the back and forth. You heard the back and forth. It seems to be coming more and more. We're going down this path of people being very verbal from the audience during the State of the Union. What do you make of it tonight?
Yeah, it's almost like a debate that you would see in a high school from time to time. I mean, it was notable. Our Kelly Ferris, who was inside the chamber, she said that Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled liar at the president at one point, was not gavelled down. This is reminiscent of what happened with Joe Wilson, the Republican congressman from South Carolina, during a speech by President Obama on Obamacare that was not State of the Union in September of 2009. You had, these vocal, visceral reactions from Republicans. In fact, according to Kelly, there was one point where he was recognizing Paul Pelosi, who was brutally attacked late last year just before the election, and you had several members, Andy Biggs and a couple of others, who didn't even rise to applaud at that moment. But that said, the president did not talk about these MAGA Republicans as much as he used to. He was interrupted by applause on 100 occasions, and even 100. And the thing that people will probably talk about the most tomorrow is, on the Republican side, is how little he addressed the border. There was one moment where he was talking about fentanyl, and one Republican who was unidentified said, fix it, and said it's your fault. Okay, that was something, a reference to the border there. And, of course, in the past week, we've had this Sputnik moment with this Chinese, spy craft floating overhead. And very little about that at all. He said, if you violate our sovereignty, we will protect the United States. But that's basically it on China. And I think that lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, just not Republicans, were looking for something more definitive on China. That was a seminal moment this week. I mean, consider how much the president talked about the Junk Fee Protection Act. I mean, that's a bread and butter issue. Very important when you start talking about baggage fees and things like that. That hits people's wallets. That's going to resonate. But in the past, week to 10 days, people have been chattering all over the place about this balloon, and that is critical. And there was very little about that today.
Yeah, a bit of a hard line on China, but not a lot of time. There was substance, but not a lot of time. Chad, I want to ask you also, there was this moment where he talked about the infrastructure bill because that was a good bipartisan achievement for him. It's something this administration should tout and highlight. And he said, I want to thank the Republicans who voted for it. And he said also something to the effect of, okay, and for the Republicans who didn't vote for it but are still asking me for things for your districts, we're going to get that done, too, because I'm the president of all people. That was an interesting moment.
Yeah, and this is where, at the beginning of the speech, he saluted Kevin McCarthy on winning the speakership, applauded Mitch McConnell for being the longest leader in Senate history. That's significant there. He talked about the Brent Spence Bridge that runs between northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. He was just there a few days ago. That's important. So he was kind of, touting the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS bill, dealing with semiconductors, those types of things. Those were all bipartisan initiatives. And if the president is able to thread a needle, much like he did in the last Congress, with some Republicans, he's going to have an awful lot of vocal opponents on the Republican side of the aisle the next couple of years. He might be able to get something done, but that's going to be much more challenging in this Congress. And that's where people are looking at, just funding the government, maybe raising the debt ceiling. That might be all they're able to do on a big bipartisan basis, and probably not big, frankly, at least get that coalition together. The other thing that he really drove home is talking about banning assault weapons. And on the Democratic side of the aisle, he talked extensively about police reform. Mm-hmm. That's something that Democrats and liberals are really pushing for because that was not done in the last Congress, Shannon.
Yeah, and Chad, I remember that there were competing policing bills. There was the George Floyd Sentencing Act. There was also an effort by Tim Scott, who is Republican senator, to put forward policing reform. Couldn't get that moving with Democrats. And now he's got a divided Capitol Hill. So I get the sense from the White House that he knew that he was going to talk about policing reform tonight. He had the parents of Tyree Nichols there and really appealed to the heartstrings of Americans, saying, your family may not have to have these kind of conversations that other families have to have with their children. But there does seem to be this acknowledgement from the White House that while they'd like to see changes, they talked about a lot of assistance to police, better training for police, that they're probably not going to get legislation on that front passed anytime soon.
Yeah, that is going to be a heavy lift. There's a reason they didn't get this done after George Floyd. I mean, consider, how the nation was just on tenterhooks after, all the riots and protests in the streets after the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, and they didn't get that done. That tells you a lot just how challenging it's going to be. The other two things that are going to be just as challenging, the assault weapons ban, dealing with gun violence, and also immigration. He talked about a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and for some others, who come across the border legally at some point. What do you do about those people? That's something that's just never going to get through on the Republican side of the aisle. It's going to be a very narrow window to get that done. And there's a reason why that has not been done. They passed a bill in the Senate back in 2013, almost got 70 votes for that, and they've never really touched that now in a decade on immigration. So that's something on the want list. Firearms, immigration, probably not going to be able to get those things done.
Yeah, and there's some issues where people agree that there are problems, that there needs to be improvement. It's what solutions get you, what tools get you to those problems that they can't agree on. Chad, if you'll hang around with us, I want to get back to our panel here. Two former members of Congress with us here, John Delaney and Jason Chaffetz. So let's talk as well about Ukraine. There wasn't a ton in the speech tonight, but there was this ironclad commitment from the president saying, shouldn't we stand for the most basic principles for sovereignty? We are going to stand with you. There was a slightly awkward moment when he asked the ambassador to the U.S. to stand up. But, of course, the idea was to show that we stand with the Ukrainian people. There are questions, though, about where is the finish line, Jason? How do you define victory here? Can you? How long is this going to take? And I think the American people obviously have telegraphed they don't like to be drawn into long-term foreign affairs, but this one doesn't seem to have an end in sight right now.
Well, I think you're hitting the most salient questions, that where is the end? And for him, the president, to say that we're going to be as long as it takes, again, that smells and sounds like an awful lot of commitment from the United States of America, who's put in over $100 billion into this fight. So, again, no recognition of the American troops and what America is doing. He was just there to show support. And look, I disagree with the president on a lot of this issue, but I don't think he made the case strong enough and to justify how Americans are going to be drained of their taxpayer dollars to address this, particularly in light of how weak he was in talking about China. And then you can't have a discussion about all this without also talking about Iran and terrorism. So there's a lot that he left out. I thought the whole foreign policy, strong national defense was just an F in terms of effort and commitment and demonstration that could be bipartisan. It just wasn't there.
John, what's your grade?
So I think Biden won the night. Democrats won the night. It was a great speech. It was energetic. It was optimistic. I think he touched on all the important things he needed to touch on. On the Ukraine, he did talk about how he's built a global coalition, how he's garnered bipartisan support in the Congress. You know, President Lincoln had a good expression. You can only paddle to the next bend in the river. Mm-hmm. And with respect to the Ukraine, what the American people are supportive of, what the Congress is supportive of, what the president is leading on and the United States is leading on, is a global coalition to push back against Putin's aggression. Yeah, and that was a successful part of the speech, and I think it was inspiring. And he talked about American leadership. And that's what we want to hear from the president. Big win for the president tonight, big win for the Democratic Party. He made a good case for his agenda and why he should not only have a successful 2 more years, but be reelected in 2024.
Another 2 things that I think he failed to address. He talked about schools, but he only talked about it in the context of giving teachers more money. Didn't talk about school choices. Didn't talk about how he's going to make schools better. And he talked about COVID and how the deaths have come down, but he didn't have any justification of why there's supposedly a national emergency going on. There was nothing and no discussion about that and how we can prevent this type of thing and what he's doing as the president to investigate the origins of that. Again, silence on all those issues. So
again, we're waiting now on the GOP response, which will come from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the first White House press secretary to end up as a governor, the first daughter of a governor to end up as governor. She's a lot of firsts, and it's significant that the GOP has selected her tonight. What do you make of that?
Well,
She's sort of supposed to be their next generation.
Look, I think it was a good choice for them to make. I think she's a new governor, right? It's good to have new faces. It's good for them to promote new leaders. It's good for both parties to always be promoting new leaders. I think politically, the GOP has a big deficit with women, right? So I think they want to promote a strong, successful woman leader, which the governor is. So I think, it'll be interesting. I hear that she's going to talk about wokeism. Mm-hmm. I think if that's what she talks about, I think, again, it's going to be a big win for the president, because what the president talked about is our strategy going forward. He talked about the industrial policy, to use that term, actually, that he has put in place for this country, which is to reshore jobs, build our manufacturing base, create jobs here in the United States, compete successfully with China, lead the world into decarbonization, manage the energy transition successfully. He had a real vision. And I think if her speech is about wokeism, it's just not going to measure up to the broader vision the president laid out tonight.
Well, sir, here are some of the things he's got to overcome. Our latest polling asked people how they felt about the economy. 20% said good or excellent. 80% say only fair or good, only fair or poor. So there's a feeling among people, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, that we're in real trouble when it comes to the economy. Did he do enough to change that conversation tonight?
He probably helped himself, honestly, I think, with Democrats. In that polling that I looked at from Fox News, what it showed is an amazing turnaround where Democrats were looking at the leadership of the Democratic Party and really feeling like he wasn't up to the leading part. And certainly Kamala Harris is in the same boat in really bad numbers. Republicans have long felt that Joe Biden was the wrong person at the wrong time for this and not up to the task. But he probably helped himself temporarily on the Democratic side of the aisle. But there's still a long ways to go to address this. And I think he failed to address so many of the items that people actually really do talk about.
Okay, and just to let everybody know, I think that we're inside 2 minutes now for the governor to come speak. This is interesting too, sad but interesting, from our Fox News polling to describe how people view America today. 81% said as a dysfunctional family, that we're not getting along and getting things done.
Well, they're right about that. I mean, and I think that was an important thing for the president to emphasize tonight, which is they actually did get some things done in the last 2 years. The bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, we've been talking for years about rebuilding our infrastructure. We'd have an infrastructure week in Washington where all these advocates would come to town. It was finally done, and it was done on a bipartisan basis. The CHIPS Act, which is going to bring a whole industry back to the United States. Democrats and Republicans, you know, people like Todd Young, who's a terrific Republican senator from Indiana, was a big leader on that, working with the White House to bring back American jobs and to rebuild that industry in the United States. And the president talked a lot about it, but look, we're way too dysfunctional. I mean, there's basic things we agree on. Jason and I just talked about. First of all, we agree that we're all done with COVID. Right? So we're definitely in agreement.
Whether it's done with us or not, you guys have learned that you're done with it.
So we're all done with that. But look, we agree that our fiscal trajectory is not sustainable. What the American people want us to do is to sit down at the table and figure that out, not fight about it on social media.
Quick final word, Jason.
Well, I agree, but it requires the president to introduce a budget. Last year, the Democrats didn't even pretend to do a budget. They just went to an omnibus. And then you wonder why, since the passing of the 1972 Budget Act, only one time in history did they actually do it through regular order, start to finish. Guess what? That's the one time that it actually balanced. So we better get our house in order, and we better figure out how to balance. You're not going to balance it in the first year, but you got to do it in the 10-year window.
90% of the deficit was here when the president, the debt was here when the...
We take it now to Arkansas.
I'm Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Being a mom to 3 young children taught me not to believe every story I hear. So forgive me for not believing much of anything I heard tonight from President Biden. From out-of-control inflation and violent crime to the dangerous border crisis and threat from China. Biden and the Democrats have failed you. They know it, and you know it. And it's time for a change. Tonight, let us reaffirm our commitment to a timeless American idea that government exists not to rule the people, but to serve the people. Democrats want to rule us with more government control, but that's not who we are. America is the greatest country the world has ever known because we're the freest country the world has ever known, with a people who are strong and resilient. 5 months ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was a hard time for our family, particularly our kids, Scarlett, Huck, and George. But we kept our faith and persevered. Thanks to exceptional doctors here in Arkansas, a successful surgery, and the grace of God, I am cancer-free. Through it all, I couldn't help but think about my mom. She was 20 years old and in her first year of marriage when she was diagnosed with spinal cancer. The doctors told her she might not live, and if she did live, they said she'd never walk again. And if she did walk, she'd definitely never have children. The daughter she was told she'd never have was just sworn in as the new governor of Arkansas and is speaking to you tonight. Adversity and fear of the unknown can paralyze us, but faith propels us to charge boldly ahead. We can't stand still in the face of great challenges. You and I were put on this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state. And he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration has been completely hijacked by the radical left. The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy. It's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. Upon taking office just a few weeks ago, I signed executive orders to ban CRT, racism, and indoctrination in our schools, eliminate the use of derogatory term Latinx in our government, repealed COVID orders, and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. Americans want common sense from their leaders, but in Washington, the Biden administration is doubling down on crazy. President Biden inherited the fastest economic recovery on record, the most secure border in history, cheap, abundant, homegrown energy, fast rising wages, a rebuilt military, and a world that was stable and at peace. But over the last 2 years, Democrats destroyed it all. Despite Democrats' trillions in reckless spending and mountains of debt, we now have the worst border crisis in American history. As a mom, my heart breaks for every parent who has lost a son or daughter to addiction. 100,000 Americans a year are now killed from drug overdoses, largely from fentanyl pouring across our southern border. Yet the Biden administration refuses to secure the border and save American lives. And after years of Democrat attacks on law enforcement and calls to defund the police, violent criminals roam free, while law-abiding families live in fear. Beyond our border, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from North Korea to Iran, President Biden's weakness puts our nation and the world at risk. And the president's refusal to stand up to China, our most formidable adversary, is dangerous and unacceptable. President Biden is unwilling to defend our border, defend our skies, and defend our people. He is simply unfit to serve as commander-in-chief. And while you reap the consequences of their failures, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. But we are under attack in a left-wing culture war we didn't start and never wanted to fight. Every day we are told we must partake in their rituals, salute their flags, and worship their false idols, all while big government colludes with big tech to strip away the most American thing there is, your freedom of speech. That's not normal. It's crazy, and it's wrong. Make no mistake, Republicans will not surrender this fight. We will lead with courage and do what's right, not what's politically correct or convenient. Republicans believe in an America where strong families thrive in safe communities, where jobs are abundant and paychecks are rising, where the freedom our veterans shed their blood to defend is the birthright of every man, woman, and child. These are the principles Republican governors are fighting for, and in Washington, under the leadership of Senate Republicans and Speaker Kevin McCarthy, we will hold the Biden administration accountable. Down the street from where I sit is my alma mater, Little Rock Central High. As a student there, I will never forget watching my dad, Governor Mike Huckabee, and President Bill Clinton hold the doors open to the Little Rock Nine. Doors that 40 years earlier had been closed to them because they were Black. Today, those children once barred from the schoolhouse are now heroes memorialized in bronze at our State House. I'm proud of the progress our country has made. And I believe giving every child access to a quality education, regardless of their race or income, is the civil rights issue of our day. Tomorrow, I will unveil an education package that will be the most far-reaching, bold, conservative education reform in the country. My plan empowers parents with real choices, improves literacy and career readiness, and helps put a good teacher in every classroom by increasing their starting salary from one of the lowest to one of the highest in the nation. Here in Arkansas and across America, Republicans are working to end the policy of trapping kids in failing schools and sentencing them to a lifetime of poverty. We will educate, not indoctrinate our kids, and put students on a path to success. It's time for a new generation to lead. This is our moment. This is our opportunity. A new generation born in the waning decades of the last century, shaped by economic booms and stock market busts, forged by the triumph of the Cold War and the tragedy of 9/11. A generation brimming with passion and new ideas to solve age-old problems. A generation moored to our deepest values and oldest traditions, yet unafraid to challenge the present order and find a better way forward. If we seize this moment together, America can once again be the land of the free and the home of the brave. During my 2.5 years at the White House, I traveled on every foreign trip with the president. A trip I will never forget was on December 25th of 2018. My husband Brian and I had just cleaned up wrapping paper that was shoved into every corner of our house, thanks to our 3 kids. When I had to walk out on my own family's Christmas, unable to tell them where I was going that night, because the place I'd be traveling was so dangerous, they didn't want anybody to know that the president was going to be on the ground, even for a few hours. We boarded Air Force One in complete and total darkness. There were no lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. Our phones and computers shut down and turned in. We were going completely off the grid. Nearly 12 hours later, in the pitch black of night, we landed in the war-torn part of Western Iraq. It was again a similar scene. No lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. The only thing you could see was coming from about a mile away in a dining hall where hundreds of troops who were in the fight against ISIS had gathered expecting to celebrate Christmas with senior military leadership from around the region. They had absolutely no idea that the president and first lady were about to walk into that room. And when they did, it was a sight and a scene and a sound I hope I never forget. The room erupted. Men and women from every race, religion, and region, every political party, every demographic you can imagine, started chanting in perfect unison over and over and over again, USA, USA, USA. It was an absolutely perfect picture of what makes our country great. One of the young soldiers yelled from the back, "Mr. President, I re-enlisted in the military because of you." And the president said, "And son, I'm here because of you." Shortly after, that young soldier came up to me. He said, "Sarah, you have a tough job." I told him, "What I do is nothing. You take bombs and bullets. That's a tough job." And in a moment that I know I'll cherish for the rest of my life, that soldier reached up and he pulled the Brave Rifles patch he wore on his shoulder, and he placed it into my hand a sign of ultimate respect. And he said, "Sarah, we are in this together." Overwhelmed with emotion and speechless, I just hugged him with tears in my eyes and a grateful heart for our heroes who keep us free. That young man and everyone who has served before him, all of those who serve alongside him, and the thousands we know who will be called upon to serve after him, deserve to know they have a country and a community back home doing our part in the fight for freedom. America is great because we are free. But today, our freedom is under attack, and the America we love is in danger. President Biden and the Democrats have failed you, and it's time for a change. A new generation of Republican leaders are stepping up, not to be caretakers of the status quo, but to be change makers for the American people. We know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future in his hands. And with God as our witness, we will show the world that America is still the place where freedom reigns and liberty will never die. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America.
And now you've heard from both sides, the president and the Republican response. Analysis continues through the night on Fox News Channel. I'll see you again right here this Fox News Sunday on this local Fox station, live from the Super Bowl. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington on the West Coast. An all-new 911 Lone Star in its entirety begins right now. Good night.
This has been a Fox News special.
The window to find survivors grows smaller in Turkey and in Syria as the death toll grows larger.